Hey everyone, welcome back. Ken Anderson here with Tashi. We're just doing a standard StreamYard broadcast today for everybody tuning in. Today we have a special guest. We've got Mayur from Arcana Network. So let me go ahead and bring him up on stage. Mayur, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. How are you?
Welcome to the stream. Yeah, I'm doing amazing. It's a good Tuesday morning for me. I think Tuesday afternoon for you, right? Or Tuesday evening?
Yeah, it is the evening for us.
Oh, perfect. Well, awesome. Well, I've had my eye on Arcana Network for a little bit. And I've been familiar with chain abstraction for a while, accountant chain abstraction for a while. But I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive today on what you guys are doing and how it's different. Because maybe I didn't realize it before, but as we're going through and we kind of do our own due diligence on partners and stuff like that. Like we want to know that when we're working with partners, it makes sense from the perspective of our audience and our customers, how we would integrate with them and what the benefits would be. And I think part of exploring what Arcana Network does is a little bit different than what some other chain abstraction protocols have done in the past. So, but I suspect that there are a bunch of people in our community who don't know what chain abstraction is. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes, explain what chain abstraction is, and then I've got the white paper open, so I'm happy to jump right in. We can go like super technical.
Yeah, no, sounds great. What is chain abstraction? Chain abstraction has a bunch of definitions floating around, and it shouldn't be, but I think we're pretty close to like a formal definition. I think some people describe it better than others. I think it is sometimes confused with this idea of hiding chains. But that's just marketing and marketing speak, right? It's how do you kind of dumb it down to the lowest common denominator, and that's what ends up being said most of the time. But I don't think that is the case. To us at Arcana, chain abstraction is basically unifying a user's asset balances across different chains where they hold funds and letting them spend that unified balance anywhere else, and allow them to do so near instantly without needing to explicitly bridge.
Well, and so let's explore that from a user experience perspective real quick, right? So I'm just going to walk through like what I'm used to from a user experience perspective using kind of the EVM ecosystem, right? This is going to be your Polygons, your Ethereums, your Binance, all of those types of protocols, those L1s. My current experience is that if I want to spend tokens on one chain, I need to have a wallet on that chain with the appropriate assets on that chain. And if I don't have the appropriate assets, say I'm on Optimism or Arbitrum or something like that, I have to move assets from whatever chain I'm on into that new one. So there's kind of like this multi-step of, say, for example, somebody deploys a smart contract to Arbitrum. We're in the gaming space. Arbitrum is kind of where a lot of the gaming stuff is happening on the L2 level. But if I wanted somebody to play a game that requires some type of token spend or allocation or inventory management or something, even in a game, I would have to move assets, say from Ethereum, kind of lock it up or move it onto the Arbitrum L2. And then now I'm available with that ETH or whatever the token is to participate on the Arbitrum L2. But there's kind of like this step, right? I got to take the step of, as the user, I have to move assets. And it's relatively easy, but it's just an extra step. And I think one of the challenges is fragmented assets, right? If I have USDC, for example, I think that's what you guys have on your website as the example. Is like if I have USDC on Arbitrum and Ethereum and Binance, and I have USDC all over the place, technically I have $5 of USDC over here, $10 over here, and $2 here. Each of them are separate balances that can only be used on the chain that they exist. Now I can move them, but that's kind of annoying to me as a user, having to move assets around. And I think that's where you guys come in, right?
Yeah, that's precisely it. I think your example is perfect. I have all of this USDC spread across all of these different places, and it happens to all of us, right? I'm not a trader. I'm less on chain than I would like to be, but I still have my MetaMask, which is fairly fragmented, right? And whenever, what I do like to try is new apps every now and then to kind of see, the state of affairs from time to time. And every time I want to try a new app, I discover that it's on some certain chain. I have to do some digging to figure that stuff out. And then once I do, I need to now hold assets to be able to meaningfully try out these apps, right? And that proves to be much harder than one would think. And very rarely it shouldn't be. So it can be as simple as how you described it. It's just one extra step, right? I have funds on Optimism, but I need them on Arbitrum. But this problem can become much more grave depending, and it's all contextual, right? So my problem can start with what you described into something more grave where I have absolutely nothing on Arbitrum. I don't have any USDC, I don't have any ETH. So now, at a minimum, I have to do two bridge transactions, one for the USDC or the asset that I want to spend, and one for the ETH, right? At a minimum. And you can now take this example and sort of like extrapolate it to an extreme scenario where, let's say, you, uh, you know, uh, the evening that Trump launched his meme coin, and you wanted to ape in, right? You wanted to go all in because
Right.
your Telegram is buzzing, everyone's giving you this alpha, and it's at whatever $500 million market cap and things like that, and you want to ape in. What are you going to do, right? You have all this fragmented stuff. You've so far been all in on, let's say, AIXBT or something like that on base, and now you have it all there. How do you move all of this here? The very thought of people trying to do this, and you can see enough examples of people actually doing this on Twitter and posting about their experience, it just gets exacerbated to a point where it's just not it's not nice at all.
Yeah. Well, and so, but the abstraction part that we're talking about here is really a technical abstraction, right? Because what we're talking about is we're still kind of doing a lot of the same things that we talked about under the hood. Like all of that asset moving that currently is manually done is really kind of, I almost think of it as like a helper utility. The Arcana SDK kind of pre-processes and bundles all the steps up into like a set of transactions that are going to end in the result that I want it to be. But it's like very surgical, right? It's thinking about what are the fees going to be, what's the most optimal way to move assets around. It's also thinking about where the liquidity is and how, if we're going to use a bridge or some type of swapping protocol, like what is the best way to move the asset. And you can tell me, by the way, stop me at any time.
Yeah.
This is how I understand chain abstraction to be, is that there's usually some type of bridging or swapping mechanism that is tapped into to facilitate a lot of this asset movement.
Yeah. So any chain abstraction protocol essentially needs to solve for three things. One is at an account level, where you want to give users this unified view of their balances. Right? It starts there. And then the next level is basically, like you rightly said, is orchestrating this entire series of operations that needs to happen depending on where the user's funds are and where they want to go. So this kicks off usually with the user expressing what is called an intent, right? So user says, I have all of this. I want to do this over here. Can you make it happen? And that's the user's intention. And once that is expressed, then you can have different kind of like whatever sort of like orchestration engine that figures out what needs to happen and how it needs to happen, and basically makes it happen. The third thing is ensuring that the user is able to get this liquidity on whatever destination they want to transact, right? So if you are able to kind of supply all of these, then you are like a full stack chain abstraction protocol, which is able to kind of, give users this view and then consequently allow them to express intents, which get filled by, some sort of liquidity layer. So where every sort of like project differs in doing this is primarily in how they approach abstraction and the liquidity. That is outside of, almost everyone agrees on just showing like a unified balances interface like we'll see here. But everyone has nuanced ideas on how it needs to be orchestrated and how this liquidity problem needs to be sort of solved. So we have our own sort of take on this, and I could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, so that's, let's talk about kind of maybe two elephants in the room. One of them is liquidity. I mean, as we see with this this video here, the idea is that you might have assets that are fragmented across networks. This one, Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, but you see one asset balance, and then when you do a transaction, you're basically saying, I want to send to this account on this chain, and it's going to figure out the liquidity problem and all that stuff. But maybe the bigger challenge is, what happens with congestion? What happens when there's a lack of liquidity? Like, some of those challenges start to happen. How are you guys? Maybe that's an unsolved challenge, right? But like, how are you guys dealing with that?
So our design is essentially one that involves like intents and solvers. So we don't use a bridge internally to kind of fetch this liquidity and figure out what needs to happen. So what we do instead is that we have users expressing intents. We have this engine that kind of interprets this intents and puts together a series of actions. And then we have a solver layer where independent solvers can essentially learn about these intents and compete with each other to kind of fulfill these intents for the user. And then they obviously do so for a fee. So that is sort of like how it works. So to give you an example, right? Let's say I have 10 USDC on Arbitrum and OP, but I want to, buy virtuals on a DEX on base, right? So now I have this 20 USDC. I express an intent saying that I want to spend 20 USDC on a DEX on base. I have 10 and 10 on Arbitrum and Optimism, respectively. And once that happens, then our engine sort of like figures out that this is the series of events. So it actually kicks off by us actually collecting the 10 and 10 USDC on these two chains from the user and basically place it into what we call an escrow contract. We call them Arcana vaults, but they're essentially escrow contracts. And now, as soon as these funds are deposited into these contracts, this in turn triggers an event which all the solvers read. And the solvers now get into a race to kind of supply this particular intent, fulfill this intent, and supply the user with the 20 USDC that they need on base so that they can actually go ahead and fulfill their next transaction, their swap that they wanted to do from USDC to virtuals, for example, right? So that all of this series of events needs to be sort of orchestrated and make sure that it happens as fast as possible to ensure that the user experience is on point.
So these solvers, I'm guessing that when they are racing to claim the intent, they're locking those assets up into a smart contract on the destination chain, correct? And
so, in fact, we go one step further. They don't even have to lock up assets; they're just holding them in their accounts. Mm-hmm. So it's custodial to them. They don't need to push funds anywhere. So what they're doing is essentially a bunch of them start to send money to the user's destination.
To the destination. Yeah.
And
then they've sent a proof of that unlocks the asset on the source chains.
So the money has to pass through a contract, and only one transaction can go through. That's the first transaction that comes through. That solver that sent that transaction wins the fulfillment. Then our engine realizes that this intent monies were collected on these chains.
Yep.
This was fulfilled by this solver, and so this solver needs to be settled and then can be settled later on. And this is something that's absolutely fine, but the user experience needs to be much faster.
Yeah. So it's not a lockup model. It's more of like a proxy model, right? So like everybody's racing to send the balance through through this contract, this proxy contract, if you will, and the money flows right through, right? It hits the proxy and goes right through, but that proof that comes out of that proxy contract then unlocks those assets on the appropriate chain to whoever the solver is, right? So if I'm the solver
That's correct.
I've got you've got my account ID, right? You got my wallet ID, my wallet address, because I'm sending the amount to fulfill that settlement, right? So if it's 20 USDC, I'm sending 20 USDC to that proxy. You know what my wallet address is because I'm the owner, and then you pass it through to the destination. It goes right through. But now you've got my address, and you can go, okay, these assets that were locked up on these other chains, Optimism and Arbitrum, we're now going to transfer the value of those assets to this wallet address that matches the sender's wallet address on the fulfillment side. Yep. So so it really is two sets of smart contracts, right? You've got one that is really the escrow for the sender, and then you've got the kind of the proxy for the fulfillment, the liquidity, if you will.
Yeah, so
the people satisfied
escrow on
liquidity.
the sources. Yeah, escrow on the sources, and this proxy, it's actually just the same contract with this proxy function on the destination.
Okay, and then but this is all running through. Are you guys using like HTLC, like hash time lock contracts or anything like that, or are you guys just signaling via oracles what's happening on different chains? Like, how are you getting from that kind of like that proxy fulfillment contract back to the escrow contract?
So we actually run a Cosmos-based app chain. And that is the one that is the state machine, almost like a glorified ledger, but it's actually the one that's coordinating everything. And the reason we chose Cosmos was because it has this thing called, essentially, as part of ABCI 2.0, it has this thing called vote extensions, where validators can basically bring off-chain data on-chain through consensus. So what's happening is that when my funds get escrowed on Arbitrum and Optimism, the validator who's running the current block, the current leader, is essentially reading this information, and through this vote extension is bringing this data on chain to our chain. And now we have full knowledge of exactly what is happening, what is the state of this particular intent. And same thing happens when the fill occurs on the destination chain. This is again brought on chain. And then once it's brought on chain, we have this fulfilled sort of intent, which can now be settled thereafter.
So so you guys are using Cosmos as kind of like the oracle chain, if you will, between the various networks that you're integrating with.
That is correct.
And what's the extension that you were talking about that you're using for that?
They're called vote extensions. It's part of ABCI 2.0.
Okay.
It's in the Comet BFT docs.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So, it's all on the Cosmos blockchain then. So you guys are actually leveraging a decentralized protocol for facilitating decentralized settlement, as opposed to, I kind of always poke fun at the L2 guys as well, just because the sequencers are all centralized, right? Anytime you're trying to coordinate between networks, there's always a question of like, how do we prevent double spend and race conditions and add fairness? And so sequencers have kind of been the answer to that, to prevent the double spend. So you can like bundle up assets, bundle up transactions, and kind of do an optimized transaction submission to the L1. But you have to still order those transactions. But what you guys are doing is using Cosmos as kind of that middleman, if you will, to move assets between the various networks.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So we look at it as like the state machine that serves as the eventual source of truth for basically settlements that need to happen back to solvers. It doesn't really come in the way of the user experience when the user expresses an intent and wants these funds to happen. We can't, because we want that all to happen fast. So basically, in this design, if you see what's happening is that the risk now, because of the use of these escrow contracts, the risk is now being moved up, like further up the stack, and it basically is now moved to the solver. And now the solver is the one that's assuming this risk, but then it consequently can charge a particular fee
Yeah.
because they assume this risk. And now it is the job of the protocol to kind of ensure that all of this can happen. So the only trade-off here is us telling the solver that you will not have instant settlements, at least not yet, and you will have slightly delayed settlements. But what this also further allows us to do is, by delaying settlements, we can actually net off a bunch of different fills that a solver would have done. Like, for example, in the example that I just gave you, I have funds on Arbitrum and Optimism, but want to spend them on Base. Now, this, let's say solver A fulfills this. Then another user comes and says, "Hey, I have funds on Base. I need to go to Optimism." Then solver A fills this again, and now you sort of netted that off for that solver.
Right.
So
Yeah.
now you avoid the cost of very expensive and time consuming also rebalancing that the solver would need to do to ensure that they have funds in all the right chains, right?
But that's gonna
So
that's
this
gonna
is
be a timing thing though, right? Because like if you're getting both transactions at the same time, you can kind of bundle and net, right? You can kind of handle that
yeah,
by netting. But
yeah,
but if you're getting them at different times, say there's like a 10-minute delay in between, I mean, you're just going to incur the inefficiency, correct? That really the
yeah,
efficiency
no.
comes is when the times are close to each other.
So the idea is that there are enough transactions for everyone. This obviously happens at scale, and at scale is
Right.
when you will actually experience that netting, the effect of netting, and the potential
Hmm.
for it. But what we do is that, as we have multiple ways in which we kind of still rebalance the solver. The solver gets rebalanced either when their threshold on a certain chain gets hit. Like if they've solved too much on one chain,
Hmm.
then we it reaches a threshold saying that, okay, it goes below this, we instantly rebalance. Or it just happens every now and then, when there is every other epoch where there is this sanity check to see what the state is, and if it's fine, then we don't touch it. But if we feel like it's less on some chain and more on another, then we just rebalance that as well.
But the solvers themselves are just community members, right? Or are they run by Arcana?
So right now we are in testnet and we run the solver, but the
Okay.
idea is to be able to kind of fully democratize this. The
Yeah,
idea
like a
is
liquidity
for
provider on like a swapping protocol.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
We, in fact, I mean, we want you to be able to run a solver node sitting in
Hmm.
your home, as long as you just run a piece of software, you have your computer on, it's connected to the internet, you should be able to solve.
Yeah, and theoretically, you've got the appropriate balance on all the chains that you're solving for, right? And then,
Yeah,
um, and then I'm guessing the rebalancing, rebalancing is just a matter of making sure that there's sufficient balances on the various networks, and you're kind of collecting fees along the way.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
okay, yeah. So it's kind of like what liquidity providers do in a swapping protocol, where you get that 35 basis or 30 basis points, I think, in most protocols now. That kind of gets split between the LPs and the network.
Hmm.
Um, but you're basically, I would assume, saying, "Hey, I've got a balance on Polygon of, we'll say 10,000 USDC. I've got a balance on Ether of Ethereum of 10,000, Arbitrum, Optimism, Base of 10,000 on each network. Anytime somebody needs to move assets around, go ahead and move them around. I'm going to be collecting the USDC on one side and sending on this side, and in the middle making a fee."
Yeah,
So it's just like this APY, this yield that continues to grow. What's uh
exactly.
what's your what's your time frame look like? Do you think? Now I get it. Like, I'm building a project too, right? Tashi, if I had my wish, my dreams came true, we would have launched 7 months ago. But what do you think the time frame is for like community solvers? Obviously, you're going to have to get the main net first, so you want to mature the technology and kind of get your feet under you a little bit.
Yeah. So
the reason I'm at here, let me give you a little bit of context here, right? Because my guess is that as soon as you guys launch this, everybody's going to be racing to become a solver, right? Because that's where the yield is.
No, of course. So but the thing is this, though, Ken, what I will say is what we've understood is that there are markets where protocols like this people run to become solvers, and there are markets where people are going to be much better off, honestly, making much better money with idle liquidity, right? So if I have idle liquidity lying around, do I want to earn an APY on being a solver on Arcana, or do I want to ape into Trump or Melania tokens, right?
Yeah.
So that is something that is absolutely true, and it's going to hold true. But there is always going to be interest as long as we make it worth people's while. So the network has to scale enough to a point where it starts to make sense to open it up to the community, because the average person is going to be happy with a certain APY, which makes sense, because they're not exactly a sophisticated market maker type who can make much more, and their expectation is much higher. But at the same time, it has to make sense, where a person should be able to, even with $1,000, for example, become a solver. There's no reason that they shouldn't become one. So, but I don't. I honestly, I'm very optimistic that we can make this happen quite early. But I think it'll have to be phased as we scale, and it'll have to be this permission set that we start with as soon as we launch mainnet, of people. So just to ensure there is predictability when people come and use our product or our protocol. But then thereafter, as we start to scale, we want to start expanding it to less sophisticated actors, people with just monies who can come in and for a particular yield, participate in this network. And they just need to, you literally need to just run this piece of software, set up the routes that you want to operate on, and put your money in your wallet, and just let it be. It'll just keep doing its thing and earning you your yield. So that is what we will start with, and we'll keep growing. We'll probably in batches keep adding more and more solvers, opening up more slots for people to come in. And but at scale, that's what I imagine personally, is that I have $500,000 from my entire network that I just want to just put away and let it keep earning money. Right? So
and I think that people are going to have different appetites, right? Like while I respect and I'm aware of, and I think it's fun to watch the meme coins stuff going on, I'm probably never going to get involved in meme coins myself, right? I put a little bit into kind of some of the DeFi space where I can get a few tens of points of yield. But I think the vast majority of my stuff, like specifically in swapping protocols, when the opportunity is like potentially 25 basis points on every transaction that goes through, like that can add up, because you're reusing that dollar over and over again, right, to earn interest. So while 25 basis points doesn't feel like a lot, when you do it 100 times, like it starts to add up, right? So if you're a solver for lots of transactions, and I don't know what your fee structure looks like, right? I'm just assuming the swapping protocols is kind of where I'm thinking. But, you do that enough times and you're talking, 10, 20, 30% APY by being an LP.
Yeah.
Now, granted, swapping protocols have their own challenges. And I think, especially early on, I think more people lost money as LPs than they did make money. Slippages and all kinds of stuff going on there. But it sounds like what you're doing is pretty straightforward. I mean, there's not a lot of DeFi risk here. There's not a lot of price discovery and movement. It's just I'm moving the same asset from one network to the other. So there shouldn't be
Yeah,
too much. I mean, the arbitrage is really happening on the exchanges, but we don't really care about that because we're doing unit for unit, right? And we're
yeah,
charging a fee in that unit. So yeah, I think the difference between like what you're doing with chain abstraction versus what like swapping protocols would do. Swapping protocols, there's a price discovery between the two, or the various pairs, right? Whether it's a pair or multiple uh, uh, counter assets, if you will. In this case, it's all
yeah,
the same unit. So
yeah,
that risk, that particular price discovery risk is gone. Slippage risk is gone, which honestly sounds way more exciting to me. But I get it. I mean, the point here is like, how do we? And I think in the optimizations is where the opportunity lies, right? And all of that that netting is where the opportunity lies. Because again, I can move assets from one chain to the next, but there's a transaction fee that comes with that. There's probably some other things that come with that. But potentially in the netting, if it's just a simple send, well, I guess there's a smart contract involved, so it's probably not as cheap as just a simple transfer, right? You've probably instead of 20,000 gas or 28,000 gas, it's probably closer to 100,000 gas,
yeah,
unlike a proxy transfer.
yeah. Unlike, yeah, that is true. I think in general, you've sort of hit the nail on the head when it comes to the way we've gone about designing the protocol. We our early ideas were actually exploring even like an AMM model to kind of do the
Yeah.
liquidity handling. But the more we kind of sort of thought about it, is that didn't just play to our strengths because of the precise reasons that you mentioned, right? The DeFi risk that comes with it, the slippage, and basically, you're trying to do this price discovery between like pools of assets and things like that. So that A was not our strongest suit, and B, it just felt like when we were kind of exploring this, is that there were going to be enough people whose risk appetite and the sort of liquidity that they hold would be enough to cover significant market share
Mm-hmm.
and be able to supply the liquidity for something like this. And the more you sort of think about it, you can actually do, and this is something we found out by even speaking to it, it's like existing solvers on like CowSwap and Uniswap X and all of these different places, is that you can actually do a lot of volume with uh, very little liquidity in basically a day. So you can do anywhere between 3 to 10x the volume of how much liquidity you have in a single day in terms of like the turnaround, and that's how efficient these systems can be.
Yeah.
And when it is like that, then you could, I mean, the scope for needing basically requiring a lot of liquidity on hand to ensure things go right is really not going to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, if I have the option of earning 2.5% yield a day on, I'm just thinking like if we were to have a 10x multiplier on my liquidity and I'm getting 25 basis points on it, and that's 2.5% I potentially am earning on, and it's compounding, right? So 2.5% compounding because I'm reapplying those fees back to my liquidity. And so like 2.5% a day is a crazy yield. Like that's an insane yield. Now maybe my numbers might be way out of line, right? I'm just thinking with the
Yeah,
whole AMM swapping percentages, but even if it was just like, even if it was 1 basis point, right? Getting 10 basis points a day on every dollar is still pretty darn good yield.
yeah.
That's
No, it
like
is. I
36% a year or something like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, you basically describe two ends of like the spectrum when it comes to what even sort of like our simulations have told us. You
Yeah.
could be as low as anywhere between 15 to 20% APY, and it could go all the way up to much more. And it comes down to like scale It comes down to how many transactions, volume of transactions we as a network are able to support, how many other solvers exist, how do you perform
Mm-hmm.
in relation to them, and those sorts of things. So yeah.
Well, and I guess I mean it's not an auction. The way your docs, your white paper
Yeah.
specifically says it's not an auction.
Yeah.
But there's got to be kind of like a fee discovery mechanism, right? Like if I'm consistently half the price of you as a solver, like I'm probably going to get matched more likely with transactions. Or is that even how that works? Is it just the first come first serve? Like how does that?
Yeah. So it is first come first serve, but what we intend to kind of introduce as we go through our testnet is basically this mechanism where we so let's say there are 5 solvers. Everyone
Mhm.
operates this route from A to B for a specific asset, and everyone has different fees: F1, F2, F3, F4, F5. And what we present to the user, and we leave it at to the user to kind of end up deciding, is saying that the max fee is X, but if you choose this max fee, you have 5 solvers potentially going to try and fulfill your intent. So your chance of fulfillment and faster fulfillment is much higher. So you're going to be paying extra for the convenience of
Mm.
everything happening much faster. But you
But
can essentially alter that fee amount and say, no, I want to pay 50% of this fee. And we say, okay, no, it's not going to be 5, it's going to be these 2 guys who are going to attempt. And you'll be paying lesser, but it's going to it's going to be cheaper for sure, but the chances reduce when compared to 5 different solvers. And if they're okay with it, it's perfectly fine. So the idea behind doing something like this as opposed to an auction is basically removing that auction element. Because how do you do a fair auction?
Right? Yep.
And if you almost cannot do it without inducing fairly decent amount of latency. That is
Yep.
not something that we want to do. We feel like what we are selling is not a DeFi product to the user. We are selling a convenience, much needed convenience. And when it improves my life 10x, I'm willing to pay for that convenience, which obviously means that it's going to be, you're not going to get best price because people are not competing on price, but they're competing on speed to be able to kind of send you stuff, because that's the lowest common denominator now. And if that is the case, then I will be able to go about my business much faster than trying to do this, because this is my experience of doing things on Web2. I hit buy and it's bought, right? I don't have to do 10 other things or wait like inordinate amounts of time. I would say even like 30
Yeah.
to 60 seconds is inordinate amounts of time. So as long as you can make that happen, then that's all that is needed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Visa's threshold is 7 seconds, right, for approval. I don't think they actually settle for like 24 hours, but the approval process is about 7
Yeah.
seconds for you to actually get your cup of coffee or whatever it is that you're getting at Starbucks. But that being said, if for example, I say my max fee is, we'll say I'm willing to pay up to 30 basis points for this transaction, and say the winner of the race is somebody who has it published at 10 basis points. Do I only get charged the 10 basis points, right? Because they're
you'll
the
get charged.
fastest.
Yeah, you'll get charged the 30, because you need to lock up the funds first. You'll get refunded whatever
Got
amount.
it. Okay. So I'm going to throw a little bit of a wrench in here because I want to see where this goes, but
Yeah.
smart contracts are not cheap. Even registering, like I suspect that in your scenario, you've got 5 solvers who are responding to a request. All 5 of them are going to submit their funds to this proxy smart contract like instantly. They're just going to start sending and be like, go pay this person, right? Because we're racing to send money.
Yeah.
That's a lot of, and you're only going to accept the first one. But
Yeah.
that's 5 people paying fees, paying gas to send a transaction.
Okay. Yeah. Because once
you just fail the transaction.
Yeah. Once that particular thing goes from 0 to 1, we just change that boolean.
Yep.
All other transactions just revert.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I always like to think about at the edges, like even when I lock up 30 basis points as my max fee and then I get refunded, there's also a gap, there's gas expended in doing the refund as
Yeah.
well. So I always like to think at the very edges of where the potential inefficiencies are, but maybe to your point, at scale and with the fees being small enough, like none of that matters. You're still going to spend as much moving things across bridges anyway. The question is, how
exactly.
fast are you going to do it, and how convenient is it?
No, precisely. The thing is, I would like to think, a very pragmatic approach to doing all of these things. I know, like, I'm very casually telling you that, we will be charged the 30 basis points, but, we'll refund you if a solver with cheaper fees wins and things like that. But then your question could be, how many of these, like, refunds are you going to do? It's going to charge, you're basically going to be paying so much money. But again, all we do is you will get refunded at epochs. So it's like we basically bundle up a bunch, end of the day, do it. Because honestly, no user is going to care about it. It is important that they get their money back because that is fair. But no one is going to say, I want that money back now.
Well, and I think that there's also like it's in the smart contract that balance is due to refund. So I'm going to assume that you have in the Arcana wallet like spendable balance and refund pending or something, pending refund or something like that, right? Something that's like, okay, this money is going to come back to you or something.
Yeah, so you will basically have whatever is in your wallet you can spend because the rest of it has gone out, right?
Yeah.
So you will always, whatever you see in your wallet, just like any other wallet, you can spend. Whatever is due to you will come back to you, and that will happen once every epoch. Now that epoch can be a couple of hours, it can be a day, whatever it may be. So we continuously want to keep making these sorts of decisions in order to kind of just keep moving forward and keep getting to a point like decision making shouldn't and our need to kind of be uh, uh, like technically correct every time is not something that will hold us back. That is something that we've decided for ourselves. We're going to make extremely practical, pragmatic decisions, things that we believe, as from like our understanding of users and building products, are good, reasonable trade-offs to make. As long as you're fair and you're able to kind of do what is right by your users, I think you will find that when you deliver value, you get a lot of leeway.
And you guys are currently in testnet, right? And in testnet, you're working with all of the protocol testnets for people to play around with and kind of build their apps on? Or are you
these are all mainnet?
You're all on mainnet accounts now already. Okay.
Yeah,
because I see I see a bunch of activity last year in May. How long have you guys actually been like kind of out in the wild, people playing with the protocol?
So all our stuff came out, I think, started to come out second half of last year.
Okay.
We started
I saw
working on
some
this
activity
idea.
in May.
Yeah. That's roughly around when we like formed like this clear consensus within the team of exactly what we're going to ship, how we're going to ship it.
Yep.
And once we had that, then it took us maybe about 2 months to put out our first demo. And since then, we've just been going about business.
Very cool. So just because the website looks sick, the SDK looks good. I like the idea of using Cosmos as kind of like the intermediary, using a public network to be an intermediary to other public networks is always a good idea, as opposed to having some type of centralized protocol. As much as sometimes you got to do that, sometimes you got to be a little centralized sometimes, but as long as the vision is that decentralized vision, you've got a plan for it. And in your case, you guys are already starting with the decentralized protocol as your middleman. So that's pretty awesome. And then what would you say are the big challenges? Like we're kind of talking, and maybe this is probably not something you want to answer very directly, but like what's the big challenge for chain abstraction? Like
Yeah, so
what's the technical challenge? Maybe the community challenge, which is more of a political challenge. Like, what do you think that is?
I think currently we're like the whole chain abstraction community is dealing with a bunch of like community political sort of challenges at the moment. There's a lot of chain abstraction FUD that starts to happen, but I
Mm-hmm.
think this is just part of that the cycle, where they fight you before accepting you, and I think it's just that point where like chain abstraction protocols, we've been at it for a while, beating our own drums, talking about how this is going to be this world-changing technology that's going to absolutely upset the status quo like nothing else before. It's going to be, I don't know, solve for mass adoption Web3, cure cancer, all sorts of stuff, right? Now it's probably come to that point where we need to like start delivering on that so-called promise. And there are a bunch of people who are actually doing a very good job and have put out meaningful products, SDKs, those sorts of things already. So it's coming to fruition. Now it's the point where you kind of prove out this thesis through product, through adoption, through those sorts of things, and not just like Twitter likes and retweets and partnership announcements.
Yep.
And once that happens through the course of this year, which I'm very confident that not only us but a bunch of other people will definitely manage, then I think challenge one will be sort of out of the way. I think then will come the challenge of really growing this and scaling this to the levels that we're seeing all of the interop protocols and the bridges of today,
Yep.
right? Millions and millions of dollars in daily volumes. That's the level that these sort of systems and protocols need to get to,
Mm.
and once we do, then we will have uh, then chain abstraction will have nothing else to kind of further demonstrate.
Yeah, I remember well, XRP had or Ripple had a cross-chain protocol at one point that was similarly of identifying pair liquidity providers and coordinating the messaging. I know 0x protocol for the longest time had a similar thing, but it seems to me like what you guys are doing is you guys are almost creating a channel for communication over Cosmos for both the intent discovery and for the I mean, you call it the state machine component of it. Like you're using it as a state machine for all of the networks, which I think is what Cosmos intended, right? That was their whole objective of like, how do we become the network of networks? Are you familiar with some of those older protocols? Like I know 0x and XRP had a protocol. I'm talking like 5-6 years ago of how do we coordinate kind of this decentralized liquidity against different pairs.
Yeah, I honestly have not really seen something to this effect till more recently. Like everything would be paired with some chain link sort of interface in between that sort of had to coordinate all of this thing. You need essentially you need an indexer and an oracle to help you do exactly this. Right? And the question is like how do you do it without we had the indexer and oracle, then you had one layer of abstraction on top of that, which were these bridges which leverage indexers and oracles to make it simpler for users. We are now taking it to the next level where we're saying bridging interfaces are completely unnecessary. You bridging as infrastructure is a very key DeFi primitive, is a very key primitive in general. That's not going to go away for sure. But how do you kind of give users this much better user experience? This is also an extremely important point, just to sort of digress from what you asked, is the fact that bridging and chain abstraction are not at odds with each other. They are at odds with each. Chain abstraction massively disrupts bridging user interfaces. You would never need to go to another one ever again.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's not at odds. They're extremely complementary, and there's absolutely going to be space for both to like grow, because I think the focus is different. I think people building chain abstraction with a focus to eliminate bridges and bridging altogether are sort of missing the point.
Yeah.
Because bridges can do what you want to do. That's no problem for them. We're seeing it today, like Across, for example, is a great example of an intent solver based bridge that just works and works very well, works very fast. It's quite cheap. It's all these very, very nice things. But I think those that focus on the fact that chain abstraction is really about abstraction, it's about improving user experiences and delivering on that, whether that user is the end user or whether that's the developer. If you're delivering on that, then you're really pushing like the status quo and creating this whole environment for innovation and for people to use that innovation.
Well, okay. So speaking of your consumers, I'm going to ask a very, very straightforward business question I ask everybody when we get on the call is like, what is your TAM? What is your total addressable market size? Like understanding, TAM not being the volume you're pushing, but the revenue opportunity, the total revenue opportunity for your space. And then what's your obtainable market? What's your serviceable obtainable market, your SOM?
Yeah, so I think that the total addressable market is literally all Web3 apps. And I say this because something like this is basically a very useful primitive at a chain level, just like how every chain needs to have like that one DEX, that one bridge, one oracle, one indexer. It needs a chain abstraction protocol. It becomes that one primitive at a chain level. And once that chain is being supported by the protocol, any application building on that chain can basically leverage that to build multi-chain. I mean, basically give users a multi-chain experience without needing to build multi-chain. Because what happens right now is that you have apps that reach any sort of modicum of product market fit that need to now very aggressively and actively start deploying on every chain, lest their code is or their smart contracts are basically forked, and someone creates a copy on another chain where this app does, which is being very successful, does not exist. We've seen this happen to everything, right? All the swapping protocols, the lending, borrowing, everything. That needs to sort of go away. Like we need to go to a place where apps build on the chain that suits them the best. They build multi-chain because it enables features and opportunities for their users. But outside of that, they really should not be building multi-chain, right? If you're just deploying instances of your app on every chain, that's a ridiculous thing to be expending any sort of resources on. And this is what goes away. And this, I mean, for any app. So you could be a game that wants to deploy on its own app chain, on a sovereign rollup, on Solana, on Arbitrum. You build where you want to and let the users come with whatever assets they have from any chain and just transact.
Yeah, right? I think that's a valid point, because I'm just thinking through, like, if I'm building a game, say I'm building a fully on-chain game, right? And I'm going to use, Mud's Redstone or something like that as the blockchain for my fully on-chain game protocol. It is EVM compatible, so theoretically there should be a chain abstraction capability on the Redstone blockchain. And I'm deploying all of my assets and all of my game logic to that chain. But players, what you're saying is players should be able to come from anywhere with whatever assets they have, and participate in that. Now, granted, there's going to be, I'm going to guess there's asset compatibility issues as well, right? Like if I launch a game on Redstone, I've got, my own token that I'm launching that is the utility token of my game, and that utility token doesn't exist anywhere else. Like chain abstraction really doesn't matter because I don't have that token listed anywhere else. Right? That's not unless I want to accept other tokens. If I want to be like, hey, I will take, ARB in exchange for game functionality. Now I can move ARB over to Redstone, provided that Redstone has some ARB liquidity somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I guess that's really the challenge. Really, is more about you've got a technical integration with every chain, and then you've also got a liquidity integration with every chain. That's
Yeah,
those are your key activities right there.
exactly. You're absolutely right. So the way we are approaching this is we want to be able to kind of provide a solution not only for devs building on popular blue chip chains, but also people launching on their own app chain or their own sovereign rollup and wanting to issue native assets
Yeah,
for users to be able to play. Everyone wants to do this, but no one will do this for very good reason, is that no one's going to go buy your token in order to
right.
kind of play your game, right? But what if they could spend USDC but are indirectly expending your token on your chain? And this
Okay.
gives like clear utility from day one.
That's the key right there. Because I'm just thinking about like even fundamentally the idea of anybody having a utility token and also having to have the network token. So I know a lot of projects have their project token, and it's like, oh, in order to use our protocol, you need our project token. Oh, but to spend our project token, you need Ether. Oh, it all has to be on this particular chain, right? So it's like, or you have to
Yeah.
have our plus our project token. So I think that there's plenty of opportunities, because I see what you're saying is making it a primitive, right? If we make this a primitive of being able to move assets across networks using the same wallet addresses, and provided there's the technical integration and the liquidity integration, game developers can now start thinking in the context of accepting assets from other ecosystems. And then, they benefit from that. They're collecting assets from all over the place, provided the asset value is sufficient to justify them letting players
Yeah.
play their game with those assets, right? Like I think it opens up the opportunity from an economics perspective for game developers to say, hey, listen, we can accept all kinds of assets into our game that aren't natively on our network, or that we didn't natively integrate with.
Yeah, no, precisely. Um, as for me as a user, I'm going to be spending stable coins. If you're a new game
Yep.
on the block and I want to try you out, I know how much I'm willing to spend,
Yep.
and that's
Yep.
fine. I'm not willing to go invest like in X amount of your tokens and just to be able to play some game which I don't know how much of your tokens I'll need, etc. But as long as I'm just spending USDC, I know, okay, so this is going to cost me $2. Is it worth it? Okay, yes, it is. Let me go
Yeah.
ahead, invest that. And then as your game grows, your business model and your economics can change to sort of mirror what you expect a user to be able to spend in dollar value. So that's
Yep.
perfectly fine.
No, I like it. Well, we gotta wind up here, because X will shut us off right at the hour mark. The broadcast just ends, so we've got maybe a minute left. But before we close out, I always like to give my guests the opportunity to talk about anything that we should be talking about that maybe you think people aren't talking about yet. Whether it has to do with chain abstraction or not, this is your opportunity to bring up a topic or share a thought that you think everybody should be thinking about.
Yeah, we don't have too much time, so I'll stick to chain abstraction.
Okay.
I think this is going to be that 10x jump in experience that is going to have severe downstream effects. And the technology is here. We have products out. Check out arcana.network. You can actually start seeing real chain abstraction products in play. You can try it out yourself. Go down that rabbit hole. See for yourself if the experience is better, because we believe it truly is. And with this sort of 10x gain that all users are going to see over the course of this year, I think it's going to disrupt very many things, and you should honestly fade it at your own peril.
All right. No, I love it. I love the passion, and everybody go check out arcana.network. And as always, we're here every week. Tuesday is the day that we do our broadcast. We usually do spaces. Today we did a little bit early because we wanted to be with the Arcana group. But join us every week, Tuesday, noon Pacific on X. If we're doing a video broadcast, we're on YouTube as well, but we'll announce that when the time comes. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you have any questions, just ping us on X or in Discord or on our Telegram. You know where to find us, tashi.gg. Thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you later.